Welcome to the second Lunch and Learn session, and today we are looking at, so the domain is taken that you want is taken. What is next? So I'm just going to start quickly with a little bit of background. So who am I, and why do I know what I'm talking about? Well, I've been 21 years helping brands protect and promote themselves online. Other things that I like to do, I'm an ambassador for Beyond Blue and Movember. And if you're a fan of Triple M, or even if you're not, today they're doing a no talk all day to promote mental health awareness. And I am also that's me with Julia Gillard. She was a pretty cool person to meet. And I'm also one of only 7 people to have completed what's called the Australian Triple Crown of marathon swimming. In fact, more people have walked on the moon than have done that. But that's just, and see, I didn't look too happy coming across the line here, but I was pretty happy. All right, so I just thought I'd start with, why is it hard to find a domain name? One of the key reasons is that every single word in the English dictionary is taken in .com. Every 2, 3, 4, 5 and letter combo and number combos now are taken. It's very popular in Asian countries to register numbers as domain names. 12 to 13 characters are the most common, so you have to start to get pretty long. It's also why we start to see, unusually spelled company names like Finder, Findr, and other things like that. Very early on, domain investors have bought a lot of really good names, and especially generic names like value.com or plants.com. And in addition, companies are actually forced to register typo variants of their domain name just to protect themselves. So what I might do now, actually, before I go on to the next bit, is actually share the process of going through and looking for a domain name, and how you go, what do you do, or what do I do when someone comes to me? So in this particular example, I'm looking at a domain name called Swift. And as you can see, okay, well, it's pretty good, availability wise. It's, almost all of the top 600 domain names, are available. But let's face it, if you don't have the .com, your company may be really set on having the .com. In fact, the former leader of car sales says if we can't get it in .com, we're not having it as a brand. What we're looking at here is actually our registration advisor, and what we've done is actually ranked names in order of importance, both sort of geographically, in the global domain footprint, as well as things like how important are they to Google and Alexa and other places. So I've been taken. People want Swift.com. I'm like, all right, well that's taken. So the first thing that I generally do is I go and look at a who is. Oh, let's just bear with me for a second. Someone is joining. I'm going to admit them to the lobby. Yeah, okay, great. Thank you for joining us. And drop back to my other screen now somehow. Great. Where is my other screen? There we go. Can everyone still see my screen of the Mark Monitor screen with the domain registrations in it? I hope so. Yes.
Yes.
Great. Thank you. Okay. So the first thing I do is that domain name's taken. I want to try and get an idea of who owns it and what they're doing with it. So the first thing I do is what's called a who is. And with the who is, just bear with me for a minute. I can see who the registrant is, and let me go back one screen here and another, and try and work out if it's owned by a domain investor, or it's by someone who's actually using it, or if the domain name itself is inactive. Just bear with me for a moment. If I look back in, I was doing a little bit more detailed analysis on that, so I'm going to do my lookup here. Today, my fingers have decided not to allow me to type. Okay, so we go to swift.com. Okay, so what I'm looking at the Whois record. Now, if you don't know what the Whois record is, the Whois record is something that should, in most cases, or used to, tell us who the domain name is owned by. In this particular instance, these people have what's called a domain protection privacy protection service. So we can't really see who's using that domain name. So what I would do next is I would, there's two other options that you can do here. Sometimes I'm using a tool called Domain Tools. For me, it's one of the best domain research tools out on the market. I would come sometimes and have a look at Whois history, because sometimes through this process, you can go back in the time machine and see who else owns it. In this instance, there we go. We've finally gone back to 2017, but we can see that it's owned by a person. They appear to be, assuming all of this is the same, someone located in the UK. That's typically a good sign with a domain name, when someone's used their personal details. I also then go and have a look at the domain name and see if there's a website attached to it. And in this particular instance, there is. So for an individual, I would sit there and say that this particular domain name is would be for all intents and purposes off your acquisition list for a new brand. If perchance that there wasn't a website, I would go one step further, and I would use a tool to try and work out whether or not there is email attached to it. And the reason why I do this is because quite often, I've had experience where a client wanted to acquire a brand from another company. For all intents and purposes, the domain name looked like it wasn't being used, but it also looked like it was a brand that was being retired. The problem is that they had mail attached to it. And when people have mail attached to their domain names, again, it's very hard to get them to sell the domain name itself. But this tool, MX Toolbox, is a really great tool. You don't have to know what any of this stuff is. All you need to know is that when you see stuff like this, it means that the domain name is being used. Just call them for email. So again, that would be a black mark against this particular domain name. Let's just assume for the moment that the domain name doesn't have email, and it's going, all right, well, we're looking pretty good. How do I get an idea, of whether or not this might be for sale or not? Because sometimes domain names are listed for sale through other parties. I would then come to somewhere like this, Sedo. This is one of the leading places where you can buy and sell secondary domain names. In fact, here you go. Here's a whole heap of names that are up for sale today. As you can see, some of them tend to be, Rodeo.com, more generic based, Estimate.com. But you might find that someone's trying to sell, a former business name that they had. You can very easily come in here and check any particular domain names. And in fact, if you have domain names that you want to sell, it's not a bad place to actually come and sell. I'm now just going to work out how to stop sharing that and go back to my PowerPoint presentation. Okay, so if the domain name isn't being used, isn't something that it doesn't have a website attached, it doesn't have email evidently attached to it, even if you don't know who the owner is, it's protected by privacy, that's still a good possibility that you could get it. But the next question is well, what's the domain name worth? Like, how much should I pay for this thing? It's funny, a lot of businesses come at this from the same way they would just buying any old domain name, rather than thinking about it as a domain name that's taken is like trying to buy a house sometimes in an expensive suburb. So the core things for me are the shorter the domain name, generally the higher the value. If you've got something that's a 3-letter name, that's worth a lot more. They tend to sell for a lot more. It's because they're easier to remember, easier to type, and a whole heap of other things. What have other similar domain names sold for? If you engage with someone, a broker, to help you, then they will generally give you an idea. It's like going to buy a house, and they'll tell you what the 3 other houses around the corner have sold for. Something that's really important with dealing with internal stakeholders is actually, what's the project worth to you as a business? It's unrealistic sometimes for the business to expect that a $40 million growth project, you're not willing to spend $5,000 on getting a key piece of internet real estate that will help you interact with with your customers. Is the seller a domain investor? Now, generally, when you deal with someone who's helping you acquire a domain name, they know most of them, and so they are able to sort of a domain seller will know the value of his name, and you'll generally pay more, or his or her name, I should say. Is it being used, and how? I think we've just mentioned that. Now, just one thing I should point out is, just because the domain name does have a website and does have email, doesn't mean it's impossible to get. I know of one particular company in their rideshare business that was able to acquire a domain, their .com variant from an existing company that had the domain. They weren't big; they were pretty small. And in the end, what they offered them for the domain name was probably 5 years worth of sales. So they took it. I've had experiences where the domain's just been registered by someone else. It's a startup. They're thinking about launching a business, and the money that you could offer, really is worth, potentially, a little bit more. And quite often in that case, traffic and relevance in Google is very important. Like, if you're going to buy a domain name that already has tens of thousands of page views, then that has some value, predetermined traffic. This, just by the way, is my 4-year-old son, who has just walked into the office. Thanks, darling. Apparently the do not enter sign. What did I should have put it at 3 foot high. All right. So if you want to acquire a domain name, the first thing that I would suggest is that you start the process early. And the reason why is that most of the time, the expectation of the business is for these things to be done very quickly. And if the reality is that they never are. I have seen sales go through, like really, really quickly, but only in the case where, buyer motivation to sell and sellers motivation, they all, work together. The second piece would be engage a reputable broker. You never do the negotiation on your own. The reason being is that A, they know how to do this. B, if someone knows who you are, for instance, if Commonwealth Bank came to me to try and buy a domain name that I owned that they wanted, I would make sure that I charged an absolute premium. But if I don't know who's coming to buy it, then I might not really. I might let it go for less than what I would if I knew it was a known brand to me. Things that you need from them before you even do anything is an assessment of value, how much they think it's going to cost, and the likelihood of success. And the reason why you need these things is you need to go back to the business and say, hey, it's going to cost $1 million or it's going to cost $5,000. Or B, you don't want to spend any money going after a domain name where it's very unlikely that you're going to get it. I had one company customer approach me who wanted a domain name that was owned but not used by Google. And there was no chance they were going to get it, no matter how much money they put in front of them. Work internally to set a reasonable budget. It is, and your broker, I suppose, should also help you do that, right? Like if they're giving you the right information, then you should be able to go back to your business and say, look, based on other domain sales, where this fits, it's a 3-letter domain name. The reasonable amount that we should expect to pay is 40 grand, but it's going to take 6 months, so that the business itself can then make a reasonable choice. Now, there is one thing that I haven't covered today, and that would be, so your domain name is taken and you own a trademark. And I think that's probably a whole another presentation in itself. But the 30-second answer to that question is that depending on the space, but the general rule of thumb would be, if your trademark does not predate the domain registration, and you can't show that the person is actually sitting on that name with the purpose of misrepresenting you, then you really don't have too much of a chance of getting it back. And the process of getting it back is called UDRP. It's generally quite expensive, and that's not even considering spaces like China, where we've got first to file and a whole heap of other nice little weird rules that make it very hard for you to enforce your brands. So for that now, I'm gonna stop talking, and I'm gonna sort of hand it over to those of you that are here, to see, have you got any questions? Is there anything you'd like me to show you again, or talk you through what some more of my logic? You can unmute yourself if you're not unmute. You could also type it in the chat if you'd like. All right. Well, look, if we don't have any questions, that must mean that I did an exceptional job at running through it. If you do find that you've got questions afterwards, or there's something else that you think that I've missed that you'd like to ask me, you can reach out to me via LinkedIn. I will record the as I've recorded the session today, I will publish the session so that you can look at it and review it at any time. Thank you, Jihan. You can also reach me at luke.richards@clarivate.com. But thank you very much for your 21 minutes of your day. I hope you enjoyed it. I did, and I will see you hopefully again in another fortnight. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Luke.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Luke.